and welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thank you for joining me. I'm stoked to be back. Thank you guys for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I appreciate it. You're helping me get into the queue of other people who are looking for astrological information on YouTube. You guys are the real MVPs. If you click the bell button below or if you subscribe, you're going to be able to get alerts as to when I put out new videos. I'm usually putting out anywhere between 3 or 4 videos a week now. And hopefully you guys are liking it. I did a video this week talking a little bit about my experience with my Saturn return and the 10 takeaways from my Saturn return that I would recommend to anybody who's going through it the first time, second time, third time, if you're lucky enough. This is my follow-up that is going to be a longer video. This is specifically for those of you guys who have Saturn in Aquarius. I will be addressing those of you guys who are actually born in the early 90s, who are experiencing your very first Saturn return. And I'll also be talking to those of you guys who were born in the 60s, specifically from January of 1962 to March of 1964. If you watch this all the way through, and if you're kind enough to leave timestamps so that way people can kind of bop in and out and see the specifics for their Saturn transits, thank you so much for doing so. I appreciate it. This may be a long video. So those of you guys who have seen my Saturn Uranus video that I did in Capricorn, did it a couple years back. I think it was like 2017. This is kind of like the part 2. So I think I'm going to start doing these for the Saturn transits just to help people out. But first I want to start a little bit about Saturn and the Saturn return, just a quick refresher. The Saturn return happens anywhere from about 28.5 to 30 years of age. It is when Saturn returns to the very degree it was at the time of birth. Saturn deals with karma, limitations, karmic lessons, anything in regards to responsibility, kind of growing up and maturing. Obviously, this is going to be more specific than my last video because we're going to be talking about a specific group of Saturn and Aquarius. But besides that, this is where some of you guys can really benefit. If you're astrologically savvy, you'll benefit from this video and you'll be able to have quite a takeaway from it. But if you are left even after that going, okay, but what's going to happen, or how do I plan, or how does it relate to me specifically? That's why we have astrologers who can really sit down and talk to you guys about your Saturn return transit. Ideally, it's best to do it when you're anywhere between 27 and 29, just so you can make the most of it, be aware of what's going on, so you can accurately, I think, know when stuff or certain themes are going to be coming up and what the purpose for the Saturn return is and how to navigate it. So you can do that when you are, like I said, 27 to 29, or you can do it the second time around when you're closer to your mid to late 50s. Okay. So, I do offer Saturn return readings. People have been asking me. I've seen like an uptick in people, who want those services. I have a Saturn return reading that's on my website. So if you're interested in that, check out my links below and you can get on my schedule and book with me. So let's talk a little bit about Saturn though. So every 28 to 30 years, Saturn returns. Saturn traditionally rules Aquarius. So if we look at modern astrology kind of connects it to Uranus. And there definitely is a lot of connection between Uranus, I think, and Aquarius. But just having Saturn in Aquarius, just know that it's in its home sign. So it's comfortable being there. Now, there is a real distinction between Saturn in Capricorn and Saturn in Aquarius. Both are going to have similar kind of like growing up feelings to it, or a lot more of an emphasis on maturity. Saturn returns in general do, but I think having Saturn in a Saturn-based sign is going to be a little bit easier for you guys to navigate. But specifically, Aquarius is a fixed air sign, all right? So it represents the 11th house, which is about the collective, people coming together, humanitarianism, friendships, networking, goals, anything that includes the masses, right? So the reason why I really wanted to make this video is whether you're going through your Saturn return the first time or the second time, one thing that I've noticed for all of your guys' transits is that you guys were born, for the most part, with hard aspects to Saturn. So hard aspects being conjunctions, oppositions, or squares. More specifically, especially, I'm gonna start with talking about the people going through their first Saturn return first. Then we'll address everybody who's a little bit older. But all of you guys have hard aspects. So, you know, some of you guys have Pluto in Scorpio and Saturn in Aquarius. So you have this natal Saturn square Pluto theme already in your horoscope. So dealing with your Saturn return is not just going to be, oh, my Saturn return, it's not aspected. It's going to come into some difficult angles to Pluto, which is going to represent the need to transform, be reborn, deal with power struggles, or anything that is about clearing or removing or letting go of trauma, toxicity, fear, abuse, anything like that. But also, some of you guys have some hard aspects to Chiron. I'll address each group individually, don't worry, which can represent the need to kind of step outside of your own personal wounds, focusing on how you can reflect on what's hurt you so you can better communicate and also join, I think, with other people to go more in depth into like group healing aspects or helping groups in general. And you guys are having a Saturn return that is not your typical Saturn return. You guys are having a Saturn return while the North Node is in Taurus, emphasizing, you know, beauty, stability, resources, finances, self-esteem. And the South Node is in Scorpio, which is about releasing and letting go of poisons, toxins, drama, secrets, you know, sexual issues, anything relating to death and transformation, right? So I guess the plus side is that it's mirroring hard angles that you were born with. So it makes me feel inclined to tell you guys, you were born for this, right? So it's not going to be energy that's unusual for you. It may feel like a turning point where you're like, okay, I'm powering myself up. I am empowering myself and letting go of bad habits, letting go of toxic friendships, releasing and getting out of debt or situations where you're afraid of something. On the flip side, I also feel like for everybody, this is kind of like a general statement, but Saturn in Aquarius is going to basically bring up the topic and the theme of time. And there can be this feeling of like comparing and contrasting with your peers. Like, oh, my friend is 29 years old and they have, you know, the house, the marriage, the job, the baby. Why don't I have that? And I think it's also reflecting a lot of just where we're at in this time where social media and networking and collaborating with other people and kind of comparing and contrasting is something that has just become so normal, I think, not specifically to like that group of people, but I think about when you guys were being born and like the internet was like really starting to kind of come online. I'll talk about some aspects in regards to timing as well, because I do want to go and talk a lot about what was happening in the early 90s and how we're kind of seeing some mirrored effects of some situations. But tech upgrades are something that I think about with Saturn and Aquarius. Friendship upgrades, goal upgrades, networking, really reflecting and sorting and sifting through who are my friends? Are these really my people? You know, am I just following the crowd, or do I need to be more in tune with my own goals? And whenever we're dealing with the fixed signs of Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, we're looking a lot at money and exchange and what we're paying for versus what we're getting, or what we can afford versus what we're spending, right? Things that involve the markets, anything that can be more speculative as well, because it's making an opposition to Leo, which is about taking a risk, and there can be lots of rewards that can come with Scorpio and also Aquarius energy. So you guys are going through a Saturn return at a time where economically, a lot of things are changing. We're seeing lots of shifts with where money is being made, where money is being invested. Values are shifting. Suddenly, we're kind of seeing that we're not just purely valuing the dollar. We're also looking at the value of security in a sense of our health and our well-being, Uranus and Taurus, innovations in resources, innovations also in you know, cryptocurrencies and all kinds of other things where it's like the game is changing. So like I said, when you start to get overwhelmed with some of these transits that are going on, remember that you were born with these hard aspects. So whenever you have a hard aspect, like a square or an opposition or a conjunction, it almost acts like Mars, and it says like, hey, you know, there has to be an action. You have to take action. You have to cut something in order to gain something else, right? So just keep that in mind. So let's look at Saturn and Aquarius, at least in the early 90s. I just kind of, you know, did a little bit of research the last day or two and made a list of some stuff that I think is really notable. One would be, so we're going to talk about 1991 to 1994. There's tons of stuff that happened. I just am naming the things that I feel like are quite prominent and make me feel like there may be some mirroring effect with the Saturn transits. Granted, this is going to be very different because we're going to see that there are going to be squares intermittently happening this year and really into next year. So history repeats itself. We know this. Astrology aside, patterns repeat themselves. What's so awesome about astrology is that we can actually see that we can find the repetitive patterns in history and connect them to certain transits and certain timed events, if that makes sense. So is it the exact same astrology that we had then? Absolutely not. This is just my takeaway of things that I'm like, huh, kind of interesting mirroring today's events. So for 1991, I've got Desert Storm that was taking place. Some of you guys who are in your Saturn return, obviously, you don't remember, like I grew up in the very late 80s, early 90s. And so I remember, and I think a lot of like the Pluto and Scorpio generation can relate to this, that there was just always war on television. We saw it all the time. It became something that was normal. I've got this like feeling, or like, I'm not even going to say this hunch. I have this belief that the Pluto in Scorpio generation in general just has grown up with a lot of fear and a lot of trauma. And I think we've been exposed to a lot more than other generations, just in terms of normalizing, like, oh, watching, you know, all of this stuff going on in Iraq and like, you know, 9/11 and like all of these things that's just become more normal, I guess, for us. And it's really not normal. We've become almost like desensitized to the trauma. Anyway, Desert Storm was happening in 1991. We also had the START treaty that went on between Bush and the Soviet Union. And what they were doing was trying to limit nuclear warheads and ensure that there was only certain numbers of nuclear warheads. And then eventually anything in relation to like their arsenal of like weaponry was limited within certain numbers. Interesting. Steps were taken to dissolve the USSR, and also Canada and the US signed an air quality agreement. Very Saturn and Aquarius, air element, focusing on the air for everybody, quality, and ensuring that the kind of like the humanitarian energy was really kind of playing into some of the transits for 1991. All right, let's look at 1992. Chicago floods happen. We also had the Earth Summit that was taking place, where there was a UN conference on environmental concerns and actions that were being taken that happened in Brazil. So that's interesting. We saw French blockades happening because they had French truckers that were protesting for, I believe, hundreds of miles in regards to laws that were being passed that truck drivers were not pleased about. Blockades, does that sound familiar? We had the LA riots that took place over Rodney King. I do believe that's also when Mars and Saturn were making hard aspects, very similar to some of the transits that we're going to be happening over the next month. And then two of the strongest earthquakes at 1992 had hit Los Angeles. Okay, so I think of like Saturn in Aquarius and then hard squares from transiting fixed planets. How, especially now, looking at the Saturn-Uranus squares, which are still going to be happening more so the second half of this year, but eclipses and also the North Node in Taurus. Taurus does deal with the Earth. It deals with the planet. It can also deal with, you know, the ground underneath us. And with Uranus being there, things can literally rock and roll. So for 1993, we have the U.S. Signed the START 2. So it was the continuation on working on weapon reduction and weapon arsenals, and specifically nuclear warheads, and ensuring that that was going to continue to be limited. We had the siege at Waco, and some of you guys are way too young to remember this. I barely remember this, but yeah, the whole compound basically was, you know, invaded, and there was tons of people living there. It was like these it was really like a cult, essentially, when you think about it. Yeah, just the fact that you had this communal living, Saturn and Aquarius with the squares to Pluto, you know, people died, and people were also being poisoned or possibly poisoning themselves. So I'll just leave it at that, but that's very Saturn square Pluto. Canada has their very first female prime minister. That makes me feel like Saturn and Aquarius, very equal, focusing on equality for everybody, regardless of gender. Nelson Mandela gets the Peace Prize. There was numerous space shuttles that also went up in 1993. There was too many to list. I just made a note of that. We also saw this year there was bombings at the Trade Center, the World Trade Center. Now, this wasn't 9/11. This was bombings that happened by Islamic fundamentalists, and quite a few earthquakes in 1993. The most notable ones were Indonesia, Japan, and India, but they all actually had quite large earthquakes that were happening at that time. If I move on to 1994, Netscape was the first real usable browser online. I don't know if you guys remember Netscape, but I sure do. That was a really big turning point in the use of the internet, and then eventually kind of bridged into what was like AOL and like the discs that you would put on your computer, and you download the software and then you could get online and you had screen names. But the fact that Netscape was making it possible for everybody to get on and then also interact, and then we could really start using search, you know, like for websites and other things, like that was the beginning of that connection with Saturn and Aquarius. So that's really interesting. Saturn was also in the later degrees, I should note. Eventually in the spring of like 94, we started seeing Saturn enter into Pisces. Now, there was a civil war in Rwanda. We also had the Northridge Earthquake. So obviously that was a very big earthquake. It kind of shattered whatever records there was earlier in the discussion that we're having. Yeah, it was a pretty gnarly earthquake. I was not living in LA at the time, but I remember seeing all about that and just the destruction that it had, especially in parts of not only Northridge, but like other parts of, I guess that's not technically the valley, but that area. NAFTA started their trading agreement. So basically it was an agreement that was between the US, Canada, and Mexico, that there was going to be a trade agreement between all three of these nations working together. There was a Ebola virus outbreak, and that was pretty significant. And we also saw some pretty gnarly wildfires happening in Montana that year. So like I said, this is not me saying these things are going to repeat themselves, but when I start looking at like the amount of earthquakes, flooding, there was also a bunch of tornadoes that I think was happening in 1993 or 1994. We're seeing a lot of like effects on the earth, right? And so even now more than ever, you know, seeing that we're going to have the return of the Saturn-Uranus squares the second half of 2022, and we have Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces, it's safe to say we're going to have probably some pretty substantial earthquakes or volcanic activity. I have a feeling that because of the sextiles from Pisces actually to Taurus, it might be stuff that's happening like overseas. I know just recently we had another earthquake in Fukushima, and there was kind of like tsunami alerts, but it ended up not being a thing, thank God. But I think that we're going to see a lot of potential earthquake activity and stuff happening closer to the ocean that can then affect land. That's just my prediction. Anyway, so this was just food for thought on some of this stuff. Now I want to get more into talking to you guys specifically. I will be breaking it down for each year. Like I said, this is general, but it's a little bit more applicable because we're looking at it on a year-by-year basis. So if you're like, Candace, how does this make sense? Here's what you want to do. If you already have your chart, pull your chart out, and we're going to talk about the particular placement. So we're going to be talking a lot about where Aquarius is in your chart. I will also be talking to you guys a lot about where Taurus, Scorpio, or Leo are, because I see that you guys have quite a few squares happening within that area. Some of you guys, it'll be a grand square. Some of you guys, it's just going to be a T-square. Personally speaking, when you see a square of any kind, it's uncomfortable. It pushes you to act, or it pushes you to change. It's the energy of Mars. If you are seeing a grand square, it's going to make 4 parts of your chart all work in unison towards change. And if you're seeing a T-square, so like let's say you see an aspect between, you know, Scorpio and Saturn and Taurus, right? But it's missing Leo, then that's a T-square. Unless you have personal planets in Leo, then it's not a grand fixed cross. However, when we start seeing like the moon go through Leo, or when planets go through Leo later this year, during Leo season, you are going to see squares. If this doesn't make sense to you, once again, consider booking a reading, because it can really kind of simplify a lot of this and make it a lot easier for you. Squares represent, especially in the fixed signs, frustration, and the fixed signs like to do things a certain way, right? We think of like, you know, in the midst of Taurus season, it's when it's really spring, and all Taurus really knows how to do is bring beauty and growth and abundance or prosperity or fertility, right? Resources, food, money. Leo knows how to be creative. It's really fixated on the heart's desire, passion, love, romance, drama, all of these things that Leo love. Like summertime and the sun, there's lots of heat and passion and creativity, and also there's a focus on having fun. Scorpio is going to be the dead of fall, and its focus is clearing everything out, regeneration. We see the trees die. We see the season really change. Things get cooler. The veil thins. And it's just very evident that things are changing and things are dying off. And then when we get into Aquarius season, which is going to be the dead of winter, it's the coldest. Generally, it's the driest. And it's also right when the frost is probably not just frost. It's like solid ice, right? Depending on where you live. But it does also talk about like holding space, and it's that time right when we're moving out of Aquarius into Pisces, where the annual, you know, I guess astrological year is wrapping up, and then we're getting ready to go into the spring. So it might actually feel like the coldest, hardest, most isolated part of the season. The reason why I bring this up is that you're going to see similar feelings, very much so, when you're dealing with these transits or when you're looking at this in a natal aspect. So I'll talk about the aspects. So get out your chart, look at where Aquarius is. I want you to focus on that most. Please use whole sign just to make it easy for right now. I know some of you guys like looking at Placidus, but this is going to make the most sense if you're looking at it from whole sign perspective, okay? If you guys want to know a little bit more about Saturn through the houses, check out my other video. This is just going to be more so talking about the transits that are going on currently and why your Saturn return is different from a lot of other people's. All right. So I want to start first with 1991, or I guess let me just address the 90s in general. From February of 1991 to January of 1994, you have been or are in or are going into your Saturn's return, okay? So it's going to go in sequence. Those of you guys who were born in 91, you're kind of wrapping things up. Those of you guys who were like born in 92, through 94, you're in it or you're getting ready to go in it. Welcome to your Saturn return. Okay, how's it going? Let's talk about it. So, all right, so here's what I have to say for you guys in general. Most all of you from 1991 to 1994 have Saturn in hard aspect, okay? So you have Saturn in a hard aspect, which means it's making a square or an opposition to another planet. 1991, not so much, but from 1992 to 1994, you guys really do have much more of a potent square. All of you will or have been experiencing currently transit Uranus in a square to your natal Saturn in Aquarius, okay? So what does this mean? You know, Saturn in Aquarius is all about, hey, we're unique, but we're a part of a group and a collective. We need to think about the environment. We need to think about other people. We need to think about our goals. And we're seeing Uranus in Taurus, which is moving up in degrees, coming into a square with your natal Saturn. Saturn wants restriction, okay, limitation, commitment, and Uranus wants freedom. A lot of you guys have been having some issues with relationships, more so friendships, issues revolving around who you hold on to and what you let go of, issues revolving around resources, where you invest and where you hold on to your money, that kind of stuff, right? And all of you are also experiencing the transiting nodes in Taurus and also in Scorpio coming into a square with your Saturn, all of you from the 90s. it's almost like you guys don't get a pass, right? Like, and this is partly why I made the video that was all about a call for revolution and what to do and how to show up in the world and how to be more proactive in working in unison to bring about global change. This is why I made the video talking about tyranny and the fact that we have to stand up to people who are abusers or users, or people who are in control, who are trying to control the masses or trying to control your freedom or that natural sense of rebellion that you have, that the universe gave to you, unfortunately, unfortunately. So you learn how to use it and wield it appropriately so you can actually help liberate other people, not just yourself, right? And yeah, you know, congratulations, you're in your Saturn return. It's a really important time. This is a time where if you've had ongoing conflicts, especially with power struggles, if there are underlying issues, especially in regards to abuse or anger or hostility, especially a lot of you guys have natal Pluto and Scorpio square Saturn in Aquarius. It makes me feel like you've dealt with bullying, or there's been online bullying or harassment, or you've had friends that were literally growing up aggressive with you. Perhaps maybe you have a difficult relationship with a parent or a father figure, or masculine energies where you were physically abused or you endured some kind of like mistreatment, and you don't deal very well with aggressors or people who are confrontational or just flat out like abusive or mean, right? So we'll break that down year by year. So for 1991 specifically, you guys are almost finished with your Saturn return, okay? So you're almost done. Yes, you've been experiencing transit Uranus and Taurus in opposition to your Pluto and Scorpio, all right? So Pluto and Scorpio is powerful. It's psychic. It's intuitive. It's fearless. It is also incredibly aware and can like almost see into the depths of other people's souls. Now, we have seen that Uranus has been in an opposition to your Pluto. Perhaps not exact. You're not going to have that exact opposition, I think, for a little bit still. But it's really presenting for you this view of like, you know, what are your ideals and what do you ideally hope to have versus your emotional drives, right? So I think Uranus and Taurus is like, you know, the freedom that you can have from resources and how that's in friction in some way with how you've lived your life. I would say this to like the Pluto and Scorpio generation in general, where it's like a lot of us have issues revolving around resources, and maybe we've grown up in very extreme situations in terms of resources or money or security or what have you. I have not had Uranus oppose my Pluto yet. It got within 1 degree in this last year, and I have to tell you, like a light turned on and I was like, oh my God, this is all of the stuff that I've been doing, and it's psychologically ingrained in me, and like there's this connection to trauma, and that trauma is normal, and that it's something that is just a part of life, and that my body has to hold on to it. And I've realized like, no, that does not need to happen. And that there are certain psychological reactions, especially revolving around security, power. So I think of like how much money, you know, one would have, how many things one would have. Pluto can definitely represent wealth, but I think with Uranus in opposition to it, it's how the nervous system has been responding to this ongoing trauma drama. And where some of us have eating disorders, some of us have drug addiction, some of us have spending habits. We have been psychologically programmed to just buy things, buy this stuff, see all these ads all over the internet, buy, everything's on sale, get it now, right? And so it triggers something, especially with this particular generation, where minimalism can definitely come in with Saturn and Aquarius, right? And I think it can be something that can be a really powerful tool over the next year or two with these transits to really reevaluate, are my ideals in alignment with my emotional drives? Is there something that's not matching up? This is transit Uranus opposed your Pluto. Now, you guys also have transiting Saturn, okay, conjunct your natal Saturn, so your Saturn's return. So depending on what house it's in, that's what I want you guys to look at. That's going to show you where in your life this is taking place. Go ahead, look at your chart. And you guys in 1991, you were born with Saturn and Aquarius square Pluto in Scorpio. It wasn't quite exact as some of the other years, but whenever we see a Saturn square Pluto, it's like dangerous circumstances, power struggles, issues revolving around authority, people telling you what to do, perhaps people being too heavy-handed with authority, which has represented this issue of like, do I fight back or do I just shut down, right? And remember, you were born with this. So you have to look at where Pluto is in your chart. So look at Saturn, what house it's in. Look at Pluto, what house it's in. It's showing you where there is some issues, wherever Saturn and Aquarius is, where there's limitations as it squares Pluto. It's how that affects you, right? How that affects you emotionally, how that affects you psychologically. And there can be some potentially dangerous circumstances that happens when transiting Saturn, which, by the way, in traditional astrology, that was Pluto, right? That was the death planet, the old age planet, the planet that dealt with, really reevaluating your life and your end time and your end period. Think of like planning your estate or, setting things up for your funeral or reflecting on your life before, you get ready to enter the grave. So it's interesting to see Saturn transit conjunct your natal Saturn and square Pluto, because that tells me old power struggles are dying, or something dying off, or it's something that needs to like literally fall off in order for there to be new life and rebirth, right? Also in 1991, you guys are experiencing the South Node transit in conjunction to your Pluto. I guess I should say in parentheses, everybody who's Pluto and Scorpio is having this transit right now. But the South Node conjunct your natal Pluto, what it's doing is it's helping you release pain, release trauma, release fear, any inhibitions that you have revolving around stuff that's too taboo, or in regards to joint resources or wealth in general. A lot of you guys who have transiting Saturn square your natal Pluto may deal with a death in the family, or you may have to deal with insurance issues, or you may have to deal with stuff that involves estates or things that are being kind of passed on, especially looking at it like communally. So it might mean that you're having to deal with like a group of people in the process, or it takes a group of people in order for you to make this change. Also, I should note that for the Pluto and Scorpio generation, we see Neptune and Jupiter forming trines to the South Node in Scorpio and your natal Pluto. So it's about healing, using vibration, being more aware of meditation, spirituality, staying hydrated, where we need to cry, we need to purge, we need to clear things out. Maybe we're aware that we have bad drinking habits, bad drug habits, prescription habits. And it's all connected to something in regards to that Pluto and Scorpio. So there can be a lot of like, water trines can be very emotional, and it can kind of come out of the blue, almost like a wave that crashes over you. So this release of emotions and feeling of going like, fuck, like my whole life it's been trauma. It's been one thing after another, right? Talk to anybody who's got natal Saturn square Pluto. They'll tell you that it's just life feels like this never ending power struggle, fight back, death, rebirth situation in your life. You were born with it, right? But you also have the transiting North Node in a square to your Saturn. So North and South Node in Taurus and in Scorpio squaring your Saturn. That's where I kind of feel like between transit Saturn square your Pluto and the nodes in a square to Saturn, it's saying, listen, you got to get this stuff done and you got to do it now. You're being pressured by the universe to step into your Saturn, step into where Aquarius is in your chart, and help other people through this period. You can't do it alone. Everybody has to be willing to work on their stuff in order to help the collective. When we think of Scorpio and we think of Aquarius, Scorpio rules other people's resources. So think how, global debt, how other banks and their interest rates, how other people have mismanaged finances and resources, or perhaps even government spending, how that's going to fall on you, right? And we think of Aquarius, it's also the collective. So there's a lot of things in these squares and these transits that are talking about the fact that with your Saturn return, it breaks down to be rebuilt, right? And some of you guys in 1991, I will say, you know, just outside of that, like I think if I had to sum it up with, you know, all of the squares happening from the transiting nodes, it's just time to grow up collectively, even more so than a normal Saturn return. Now, some of you guys have Saturn and Aquarius in opposition to Chiron, especially I think at the end of 1991. Saturn in Aquarius in opposition to Chiron in Leo makes me feel like perhaps maybe you're having issues with like, do I just go along with whatever everybody else is doing? Do I do it because my friends are doing it? Do I jump in on that? Do I join the bandwagon? You know, do I follow my peers or do I follow my heart? And there can be issues with like dating, because like Leo can be falling in love and dating, or children. There can be some inner conflict revolving around, do I want to have children in a world like this? Or some inner conflict just revolving around whether or not you're feeling like you're a part of the collective, or if you're afraid of being squeezed out. So I think of like what's gone on with the vaccines, and if you got pressured into doing it and felt like you had conflict in relationships with friends or other people. If you feel the pressure to be on social media and be posting and being a part of those groups collectively. If you've just had friend fallout in general, which is some of this, what's gone on in the world over the last year, just kind of food for thought. So congratulations, 1991. You're almost done. You are going to make it. You're going to see it through. Let me know how this has been affecting you. I'd love to hear. For 1992, some very similar stuff. So, you know, some of you guys will listen and I will kind of paraphrase, so I'm not repeating myself. But similar to 1991, you have Uranus in opposition to Pluto in Scorpio. So really focusing on that balance between your ideals and whether or not your ideal control or power or investment is in alignment with your emotional drive. If it really emotionally feels fulfilling, or if it feels like you need to rebel and change up your values or your resources in some way. Now in 1992, what you're having is not just your Saturn return, but it's activating, like I said, your natal Saturn square Pluto. Now, 1992 and 1993, you guys have this the strongest, and this is about letting go of those old power struggles in your life. I've seen a lot of these clients recently, and it's been a lot of like you guys getting re-triggered from traumas from your childhood. That's something I've noticed, especially if it's happening in angular houses. So if you're a fixed sign rising or a sun or a moon, maybe you're feeling this square a little bit more. Maybe you're seeing things that remind you of your childhood playing out at work, things that remind you of your childhood playing out in a relationship. Maybe there's difficult relationship dynamics because of things that haven't been dealt with from your childhood. Maybe you're in a relationship and trying to kind of both equally work through old patterns and kind of put them to rest, so that way you can live your life differently in a more harmonious way. But your guys' Saturn square Pluto is particularly strong. And one thing that I would say is you want to look at authority figures in your life, like parents, bosses, bullies, people or things. It doesn't always have to be people, but things that have always had a hook in you or control over you that you have not been able to feel like you can get out of. It can also be like obsessions or limitations or fixations, or this feeling of being limited by circumstances because of how things have always gone in the past. And whenever I see the Saturn square, especially to Pluto, for all of you guys, it can feel like you're between a rock and a hard place. It can be things like, I really want to pick up and move, but I'm bound to my family. Or I really want to change my job, but I don't have the money to quit and go and start my own business. Like there's this feeling of something hanging over you that you can't get out of. And it's very psychological, right? Pluto is psychological. And what I love about this is that even though it's difficult, part of what's happening is that collectively you guys feel so much suppression or so much not in control that there's like this whiplash effect that's going to happen, especially with transit Uranus. Now, you guys in 92 do have Saturn in opposition to Chiron and Leo. I think this is, you know, having friend crises, issues where you feel like maybe you're not quite merging with other people. Maybe you're not feeling well received. Some of you guys are probably having a little bit of dating drama, or there can be issues, especially revolving around raising children and being re-triggered and like seeing stuff from your childhood coming up and you're like not knowing how to deal with it, or issues integrating your children into like, you know, their lives and them, possibly for some of you guys who had kids, you know, prior to the pandemic, it's like now your kids are a little socially out of whack and they're having a hard time adjusting. Or maybe you had a 2 or a 3-year-old who should have been going to preschool, but now they're not as socially adjusted. The Saturn in opposition to Chiron and Leo can literally be issues revolving around children and whether or not they're being included or feel like they're a part of groups. And if that triggers something from your childhood and you're like, what's going on? You know, like Timmy's not getting along well with the soccer team, and that triggers me because I remember how I was when I was little and I didn't feel like I had a lot of friends. So I'm putting my kid into all of these sports and all these activities, and it's like rehashing that trauma, right? That can happen, and it can literally like hurt your heart. You guys, 1992 are also experiencing transit Uranus square your natal Saturn. So it's this conflict between independence and success. That's the best way that I can put it, right? Uranus and Taurus can be sudden success. Saturn and Aquarius is, you know, you see some of your friends that are just like skyrocketing and they're super successful. And like maybe you have a friend that sold a bunch of NFTs and made a ton of money overnight and bought a nice car and moved into a big penthouse suite. And you're like, well, how do I do that, right? Like, how is that possible for me? Like, how do you go from this to that? And where are we starting to see that innovations in art, beauty, creativity, design, finances can suddenly help you break free of pre-existing limiting social status, right? So like very quickly, we can see with the Saturn-Uranus squares that if you break out of something that's been limiting for a long period of time, you can radically redefine yourself and your values, and we can see high highs and low lows, especially with money and resources. Now, for 1993, you guys have a natal Saturn trine the South Node. So you guys have Saturn in Aquarius, and it's in a trine to the South Node in Gemini. And also, for the most part, it's in a trine to your natal Jupiter. This I like. This means that you guys have a grand air trine that's being formed. You have it natally, but it's really being formed with the activation of your Saturn return that's starting up. And air trines are about communication. So when we see that Saturn and Jupiter are working in unison with your South Node in Gemini, it's clearing, it's helping you communicate, it's helping you clear past life, like karma. It's teaching you how to communicate in a different way, or it's making you more conscious and aware of how you're exchanging information. Because your North Node is in Sag, I think some of you guys are probably going to be considering like learning new ways to connect. Maybe you guys are going to be literally changing or adapting the way that you're learning to work with technology or language, or possibly making bigger changes revolving around education in general. So I really like that trine that you have. You also have Saturn in Aquarius and a square to Pluto in Scorpio. So a lot of what I have said previously applies to you guys. Everything revolving around the power struggles, the dynamics, control issues, all of that. But I think that your guys' strong suit is really going to be the fact that Saturn is in a trine to your Jupiter in Libra. For the most part, some of you guys at the end of the year, I don't think have that. And also in a trine to your South Node. So it's like learning how to connect with people at a distance or afar, learning how to communicate in relationships better. For 1993, I would say that this is probably one of the easier years that are going to navigate this. So you really want to lean on where Gemini and where Libra is in your chart. It's going to be very helpful for you. And then for 1994, so it really is only until the spring of 1994, you guys are going to be having your Saturn return closer to the end of this year, closer to spring of 2023, because Saturn's only going to get up to, I think, about 26 degrees of Aquarius this year, but you're going to start feeling it basically. For you guys, you have the natal North Node conjunction in Scorpio, and that tells me that you guys are very, very powerfully aware. It's like you guys have that little psychic radar, or you see straight through the bullshit. So recently the South Node has hit your Pluto. So it's actually activating the South Node Pluto contact, which is releasing all of this trauma, drama, pain, fear, especially from past lives. You have been experiencing your reverse nodal return, which is kind of like the past and the future meet in the present. So there's a lot of you asking yourself like, do I want to take this stuff with me, or do I want to leave it? Important lessons in people that relate to the future also can come into your life. So it's really cool because you're actively kind of like in this middle ground where you have a lot of control. That's basically what I would say. But it's bringing up the same topic of, you know, the South Node on your Pluto, where it's like letting go of obsessive tendencies and habits and the need to control things. Now, you're also experiencing transit Saturn and Aquarius conjunct your natal Saturn. So this is your Saturn return. But like I said, it's going to start closer to the end of 2022, going into 2023. Now, in the next couple of years, we are going to see that you're going to have Uranus come into an opposition, but it's down the line. It's going to take a little bit longer, so I'll put a pin in that. And you just finished the nodal squares to both your Saturn and Aquarius, so the North Node and the South Node already squared your Saturn, and you've been feeling recently like, oh, I really have to do this, wherever Aquarius is in your chart. You got that push early before your Saturn return, so I would imagine that the transits that have been happening really since, let's say, early March all the way until the end of April, as Venus, Mars, and Saturn all align, right, here over the next couple of days, it's basically saying, really to everybody who is born with Saturn and Aquarius, time to step up, time to take action, come together. You guys were born with these placements because you were here to organize. You're here to call up friends and say, how are you doing? What do you need? Can I help you? You guys are here to create new networks, new platforms, new associations. You guys are here to help save the planet. So it requires you guys to all collectively come together and organize. Now, that doesn't mean it just has to be you guys, like you're Captain America or something. It just means it's more like you guys are coming together and figuring out new systems and solutions. So that way, moving forward, we're actually able to build a much more solid, equal, kind of imbalance and humanitarian type world as we start to see these old power structures fall, okay? And I know a lot of you guys have issues with authority. I understand that. It's the squares that you have to Pluto. I get it. But one thing that I would say to all of you is that with Saturn in a square to Pluto in your natal chart, you don't have to be mean. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to be reactionary. You don't have to be vengeful, right? We don't have to get even. We don't have to do that. We also don't have to fight fire with fire. If you're somebody who identifies as somebody who is a victim, or if you've been abused, or if you've been neglected or mistreated, you don't have to carry on that pattern. And so even if you're like, hey, got myself out of the bad relationship, don't talk to my mom, I ditched my, job because of this issue with my boss, you can kind of still see some of these lessons karmically repeat, right? So you can see it come from other sources. So sometimes just checking out doesn't mean you're actually doing the work. So you can see it manifest in another way, like a relationship breakdown or an issue with a friendship or something else that's still, even if you're avoiding that theme, it's going to come up and it's going to trigger you psychologically. And I would say when you change the way that you respond to fear, and you no longer allow those monsters in the closet to control how you respond to things, and you start focusing on being an actor, not a reactor, and you're coming together with other people, you guys are gonna help us get out of the shit show that we're in the world right now. Like, we really need that. And this is also me doing my part because I have my North Node in Aquarius. So I have Uranus on an angle. I have a lot of aspects to my natal Uranus. So I'm very Uranian. But I know that it's not my job to do this. It's my job to work with younger people. So let me know, all of you guys born from 1991 to 1994, how is it going? Sending you all of the best vibes when it comes to your Saturn transit. Stay strong. It's going to get better. There is a lot of gold on the other side. All right, so now let's get into our elders. I say that respectively. I know there's a lot of you guys who have been popping in. I have to say, it's been like happy tears the last month or two since really putting out content that I relate more to and giving less of a fuck about the filter and how it comes across or what I have to say, and really stepping into doing more work that I think is more fulfilling and more meaningful. Not that what I've done in the past hasn't been, but I'm kind of starting to find I'm hitting my stride when it comes to connecting with people and just saying what I have to say. Anyways, happy tears. I've gotten dozens of emails over the last couple of weeks from people. And just because I don't respond to you guys doesn't mean that I don't get them. So I just want to say thank you to those of you that have sent them. But I've gotten a lot of people from the early to mid 60s who have been sending me emails. And you guys are fucking awesome. Thank you so much for the support. And sometimes people just want to send me emails and tell me like, hey, really appreciated this. Here's some food for thought. They'll give me other things to study, other time periods. There's other teachers who pop in that want to connect. There's other presenters and creators. And I'm just like so emotionally overwhelmed in a good way because I feel like, I'm not going to cry. I feel like it's been really helpful. So I just want to say thank you so much. All right. Okay. So for from January of 1962 to March of 1964, you guys are experiencing your second Saturn's return. Do me a favor, if you have any bits of advice or anything that you want to leave for younger people in the comments, leave them below because I think it can be very helpful in reminding them to keep going, or what your takeaway and your lessons were and what you're anticipating is going to happen this time around, or your plan, because I've encouraged everybody to have a plan when you're making, you know, sense of what's going on with the astrology. So let us know below. Okay. So those of you guys who were born in 62 to 64, all of you were born with Saturn in Aquarius, and it was in hard aspect to Neptune and Scorpio. So Saturn in Aquarius is the collective awareness, consciousness, where we're going, how we are buckling down in society. It was receiving a square from Neptune and Scorpio. Now, personally, I'm a fan of Neptune and Scorpio. I'm also a fan of Uranus and Scorpio. But still, when you see Neptune and Saturn square off, it's very different than the Saturn-Uranus squares, where the younger generations are dealing with issues of authority. You guys are dealing with issues of mixed emotions, mixed feelings, not knowing whether or not you want to step out and say something, not knowing whether or not you can trust what's actually being put on the internet. Some of you guys are aware of the manipulation that's going on in the media or the distortion that's happening, and that's because of, I think, the square to your natal Neptune. But Neptune in Scorpio can be a lot about spiritual awareness, wellness, what's spiritually toxic, what's literally toxic that you can put in your body, what you're hearing, what you're watching, what you're absorbing. So when you see the square between Saturn and Neptune, there is issues with perception, or there can also be issues with whether or not you're giving your power away, or whether or not you trust something. And Neptune it has like this softening effect where maybe because of what you're seeing collectively, it's making you want to step out of the shadows and kind of say, okay, I want to help. Now, in the midst of all of this for you guys, it's not a normal Saturn transit, similar with the younger generation. You guys are seeing the North and the South node activate. So you actually have the South node in Scorpio transiting your natal Neptune. Be mindful as you have this transit. There is lots of past life recall, really prominent dreams. There can be a sense of being very emotional, very empathic, very tuned in. But you can also be looking at the darker side of Neptune, where it's like, are you retreating? Are you drugging? Are you drinking? Are you sleeping too much? Are you sick? Is there something going on? Especially, a lot of you guys are going through a lot of hormonal changes with this transit, with the South Node conjunct Neptune. So it can be for even, you know, some people, especially women, like menopausal things that are happening. And Scorpio deals with the reproductive organs. So I'm wondering, like, have you guys been experiencing that? It can also be a time where you're just more prone to getting sick. Now, the South Node's going to move through there pretty quickly, so I'm not saying this to like freak you guys out, but I would just say keep that in mind, that both from the North Node opposition happening with Uranus and that opposition to your Neptune, there can be very quick kind of like spiritual downloads and like waking up, and you can have almost like spiritual kind of flu hangovers where, you know, some people who I've been talking to are like, I'm having vertigo. Other people are telling me that their sleep schedule is totally disrupted. Let me know how it's happening for you. But yes, because you guys have Neptune in a hard angle to Saturn, this transit is going to kind of mirror in some ways some of the same things that you guys were born with. So there's a lot of perception things that are going on, whether or not you are joining in with what's going on collectively, and if you're willing to release and let go of some of your spiritual knowledge, spiritual information, and things that can really kind of help. Like, I've seen a lot of healers, psychics, practitioners, therapists, you name it, who were born during this time. That's like, wow, like shit's getting kind of wild. I can't just hide out in my healing studio. I have to go and help other people. So a lot of you guys are being pushed to kind of come out of the cave or get out of bed or be willing to kind of, you know, talk about the elephant in the room and not hide out. So that's something that I would just kind of keep in the back of my mind. Now, right now you're having your Saturn return. So I would say it's a really important time to reflect back on what was happening for you in the early 90s. So the same time period that I was talking about, 1991 to 1994. Right now, Saturn and Aquarius is being squared by Uranus and Taurus. So there's this back and forth that you're having about independence versus success. Can I be more successful if I go out on my own? Am I going to be happier if I'm moving out of my current relationship and deciding to get divorced? Does it make sense for me to focus more on my self-growth and less on, you know, me running around and taking care of kids, and now my children are adults, so now I'm focusing on myself and I'm feeling like I'm feeling myself and I'm most successful when I'm independent and having a good time? So there's something going on there, and I think you guys are weighing the options with Saturn in a square to Uranus. Now you guys also have the transiting north and south node in a square to your Saturn. So this is the case for everybody who has Saturn in Aquarius. It's growing pains, baby. It's about growing up, becoming more mature. I feel like your second Saturn return is kind of entering you into your golden years. There's a lot of like reflecting on what you've done the last 30 years and like now focusing on the second half of your life. And there can be much more preparation and awareness of just your own morality and like, you know, how you feel as a person, and like, you know, whether or not you're feeling like, you know, you're who you used to be and what you've learned, and possibly, you know, bestowing that information on other people. There can be a real emphasis in you wanting to start groups or collectives or associations. Maybe you're looking for new friends. Maybe you want to join a tennis league, right? So it's not limited to just like, oh, I want to run for my local office. It could be as simple as I want to start a chess club, or, you know, I want to, you know, get a group of people together who are going to go and pick up trash on the beach. So things like that. You guys are also experiencing the South Node, like I said, transiting your Neptune. So it's releasing sorrow, pain, illness, and issues that deal with like hiding away, okay? So we're going to talk first about 1962. Welcome, guys. I hope your Saturn return is going well. You guys were born with Saturn conjunct the South Node in Aquarius. So your Saturn return is peppered with karmic clearing, dealing with loss, letting go, releasing of friends. Believe it or not, also people can come into your life with this transit. So people who you haven't connected to in 7, 14, 21, 28 years can come back. You can be going to reunions. There can be people who are karmic relationships that kind of come into your life. So I think that's something else that I would take into consideration. Friendships in general, it's more so friendships, it's less romantic, I think, especially with the square that you're having to your Saturn. Then we have your Saturn in Aquarius, and I think that it's interesting because it's in a square to your guys' natal north node in Leo, that you know, you were born with this opposition, right? Saturn conjunct the South Node in Aquarius. So this coming in and going, no, you know, I'm not always getting stuck into what the collective is doing. I'm not always going to focus on friends. I'm not always going to get wrapped up in groups. I'm going to focus more on myself. So with your Saturn return, there is this emphasis more on, well, what's best for me? What am I doing? So it's kind of like backwards in a way, right? Saturn on the South Node is saying that you have to remember where you came from in order to get where you're going. So maybe perhaps for you guys, this is a little bit more complex because we see that, you know, Saturn is transiting. Saturn is actually opposing your natal north node. So you have to reflect on the past and kind of wrap the past up in order to move forward. Maybe you have to say goodbye to certain friendships. That's the feeling that I'm getting. Or old goals of yours, maybe. Like if there was a goal that you were aiming towards, you're like, that's not my goal anymore. And then also it's squaring your natal Neptune in Scorpio. So it's kind of complex. You guys have a T-square, right? When you think about it. Aquarius and Saturn on the south node. You have the north node that's in Leo. And then you have Neptune square. So you were born with Neptune square the nodes. So what you're realizing is that you're willing to go your own way this year and dissolve old friendships if it means that you're doing it for the right reasons, if it's focusing on what's better for you, for your happiness, for your joy, getting out of trauma drama. I could see that totally with the Neptune square. And for the most part, you guys are actually really starting to wrap up your Saturn return. So that's the good news. I guess in the midst of all of this, you have transit Uranus in Taurus, which has been opposing your Neptune and squaring your Saturn and squaring your node. So you have a grand fixed cross that's setting up in your chart. That's telling me that wherever you have, you know, Scorpio, Leo, Taurus, and also Aquarius in your chart, they're squaring each other. So the wheel of the chart is turning. So you're going to see changes in 4 areas of your life. That might be a little bit more complex and might be something that can be better explained to you in a reading, because it's going to really kind of help define specifically where in your life that is happening. So congratulations on wrapping up your second Saturn's return here soon. Let me know how it's going. For 1963, you guys have Saturn in Aquarius, and it's in a square to Neptune in Scorpio as well. So once again, dealing with that perception issue, issues revolving around, I think, stepping up or learning to kind of step back and fading away and taking a little bit more privacy. And you guys are getting hit pretty hard because you have transit Uranus in opposition to your Neptune. So that is, you're either going to wake up or you're going to go to sleep, especially for people in the 1960s. You know, this Saturn return is a lot of like, am I going to keep my mouth shut and do nothing? Or am I going to go and, you know, protest with people? Or am I going to go and raise awareness or raise, you know, money or assistance for people who are in need? For you guys, it's like a turning point where it's like, if you miss the Uranus-Neptune opposition transit with the square, you may stay asleep. You may stay unaware of what's going on in the world. You may not have the energy to get involved, and you may actually fall a little bit behind. That's my warning for you. Also for you guys, you have Jupiter in Aries. You were born with Jupiter in Aries. So I guess the nice thing is that you do have Jupiter in a harmonious aspect, a sextile to your Saturn in Aquarius. So Jupiter in Aries is the self-knowledge, the self-awareness, the willingness to go out there, to travel, to teach, to learn, to share, to inspire, to publish, whatever. But you're doing it on your own. When it sextiles Saturn, it's basically saying if you come together with a group of people, if there's a common goal and you're working with a collective, it can help you actually go the distance and find more personal joy, positivity, and expansion. Now, what's cool actually that you're going to see this year is you're not just having your Saturn return, but you're also going to be having a Jupiter return, as long as it's within, I think, 8 or 9 degrees of Aries. Otherwise, you're going to get it more so next year. But still, Jupiter will ingress into Aries, and Mars will too. So like June and July are important times to watch because you're in your Saturn return and you're in your Jupiter return. So Saturn is more, you know, kind of limitation, kind of winding down, focusing, getting super goal oriented, laying the cement for the foundation for commitment. And Jupiter is the complete opposite. It's like, here we go, we're going the distance, especially when it's in Aries. So I like that 1963 is having both their Saturn and their Jupiter return at the same time. It's a really awesome Jupiter return because it's going to have Saturn in a harmonious aspect. And it's also a really great Saturn return because you're going to have Jupiter in a harmonious aspect to Saturn. So both expansion and commitment can work hand in hand to be able to better kind of build into the future and also with other people. Now, you guys are also still experiencing the nodal squares. So yes, the nodes are squaring your Neptune, which is bringing about the need to dissolve, get rid of toxic, dramatic situations, and Uranus is there as well. I would say for you guys in particular, I mean, Saturn and Aquarius in general, but you guys in particular, you want to take 2022 3 months at a time, because you're seeing everything set up right now over the next month or two in Aquarius, which is saying, here's the mission, this is what we're doing, this is the plan, this is what we're committing to. Even if it means uncomfortable change, even if it means cutting certain habits or people off, whatever. Nobody is going to go through this Saturn transit, both those of you guys in the 90s and those of you guys in the 60s, unscathed. It just ain't gonna happen because of the squares to Pluto, right? Because of the squares to the nodes, because of the squares or oppositions also with Uranus. All 4 of these signs have moving parts and pieces. And what I love about 2022 is that even though it's uncomfortable, it's almost like the pieces of the puzzle start coming in right now. You're going to start seeing them show up over the next month, where you take action and you have to really focus. When we get into Taurus season with the eclipses, you're going to see physical changes, financial changes, value changes. When we get into Leo season, that's real takeoff time. So July going into August, it's going to enact a grand fixed cross, and it is time to really focus on younger people, creatives, on what our heart wants, being passionate, practicing love. And then when we get into Scorpio season, we're going to see the results of some of the hard work that we have been putting in motion this year, and even more change. So take things 3 months at a time. Okay, so for 1964, you guys were born with natal Saturn in Aquarius square Neptune in Scorpio. So once again, issues with perception, fact versus fiction, what society is saying versus what you intuitively believe. So whenever you're seeing Saturn come into a square with Neptune, it's what am I getting rid of? What am I dissolving? Now this is really important because the South Node is going to hit everybody from the 60s Neptune. So we have the opportunity to remove poison, venom, sticky things spiritually, depression, isolation. But I think that with Saturn in a square here, it's going to continue to keep reinforcing that we need to come together with other people and not avoid certain situations or issues or turn a blind eye, right? So that's really important for the 1960s who are going through their Saturn return. Now, also in 64, I just want to make sure I'm not missing any other aspects because that seems to be the biggest one. Just want to make sure here. Give me a second. No, I think that's pretty much it. Although if you are a 1964 Saturn in Aquarius, you have a lot of planets in Aquarius. I'm especially looking at like the February, right before Saturn changes signs. It looks like Saturn's going to change closer to right around the end of May. But if you're an Aquarius from 1964, looking at this conjunction, you got a lot of planets in Aquarius. Even if you're a Capricorn, you have Saturn and Venus involved. But I'm really interested in the Aquarians from 1964. If any of you guys are here, leave me a comment. It looks like you guys mostly have Sun, Mars, Saturn. Some of you guys even have Mercury, all in Aquarius. How's life going for you right now? You're going to have a Saturn return, a Mars return right at the same time. Saturn's going to go into Pisces in March of 64. And when it retrogrades, it'll drop back into Aquarius again, and that'll be in September of 64. And then it fully moves into Pisces in December. But everybody in 64 is still going to see Saturn in some kind of hard angle to Neptune. I think the nice thing is that it does appear to be coming out of the square, so it's probably going to be less of a harsh Saturn square Neptune as it was for like 1963 and 1962. Okay, I know this is a long video and there is a lot of information, so those of you guys who are listening and you have some thoughts on this, I would love to know what you think. How does it resonate with you? I'd love to hear from both of you guys from the 90s and those of you guys in the 60s. What can the 90s teach people in the 60s? How can you guys help them adapt and learn more about this new world and technological advancements that we're making? Where can those of you guys who are younger really benefit from the stories and also the experiences from people who have already been through their first Saturn return? I think that I would love to hear from some people who are older generations. Chime in and hear what you have to say. Congratulations on everybody going through your second Saturn return. That's or your first. That's a big accomplishment, but the second one in particular, give yourself a pat on the back. And let me know how this is playing out. I'd love to hear your sun or your rising sign. Let me know how these transits have been building for you, what's been taking place in your life, what you have been creating or working through or working towards. Keep in mind for everybody that as we speak in the next week, Venus is going to fully be enclosed by Mars and Saturn. It is Saturn's time right now for the next 3 weeks. It's going to be a lot of Saturn energy. So with Mars and Venus and Saturn all tearing through the later degrees of Aquarius, nobody on the planet collectively gets a pass. But you guys, because you're experiencing conjunctions, you get a power up. So give yourself a pat on the back for pushing through it. Know that it's a really important time to be showing up. So keep pushing until you get to the better part of mid-April. Focus on your goals, meditate, go hiking, call people up, ask for assistance, focus on working in unison with others to be able to create change. And you will be very, very proud of the accomplishments later this year if you really do the heavy lifting now. As always, thank you for watching my channel. I appreciate it. I love you guys so much. I'm going to be back. I'm doing live readings tomorrow on my channel at 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, and it's going to be 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So if you'd like to get a tarot reading, you want to drop in, or if you want to join my memberships, please do. If you want to learn astrology with me, check out my links below. I've got a beginner's astrology course that is going to be starting on April the 3rd. We're going to be meeting on Sundays and Thursdays for several weeks. We're going to kick it off here pretty soon. I have a few spots open left. We're going to be meeting on Zoom and doing live readings and looking at charts and discussing the ins and outs of beginner's astrology. If you want to learn from scratch from the very beginning, you can, and you can learn it with me in a group of other students in a communal Zoom reading room. So I'm excited for that. So please consider joining. Otherwise, I will see all of you guys very soon, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.